pull all my Zoom stuff off to the side. Chat, great. All right, folks. Probably give it another minute or two, and then I will get us started. All right, we'll go ahead and just begin now. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today, I'm going to be showing you all a little bit of HTML coding, but mostly what I want to do is make you more comfortable with being unsophisticated when it comes to technology. So learn how to love your inner tech barbarian. So first, a little bit about me. My name is Cole. I work in the Office of Campus Life. I'm a web and student systems manager. I've been at AU since 2012, started part-time, I introduced myself as the tech guy, and that's a sticky label, but it's led to a lot of opportunities. And so you may have seen me behind a TV fixing a digital sign. I graduated from a school in Minnesota and got a BA in political science from Carleton College, and then an MA in game design from AU. I'm not I would say like classically trained in coding. I learned a lot of this on my own. So I think that's part of why I appreciate the more unsophisticated nature of some tech work. As you can see, I'm a bit irreverent, so apologies if I'm a little rough around the edges. But let's talk about what we're going to be doing today. So I've got two tortured metaphors that I'm going to keep bringing up, and I want to explain them because I can't shake it. So the first is going to be that your web page, think of it like a house. I worked construction every summer whenever I was in high school, and you learn a lot about how to fix things around your house, but you don't have to know construction to fix like a light bulb, and you don't have to know design in order to do construction. And that's what I want to do. Your web page is a house. Let's change some light bulbs. Let's maybe patch a hole in the wall. And if we're getting really crazy, maybe like we'll frame a wall, but we're not going to design and build a house from the ground up here. So I do want to set that expectation. And then next, my sort of tech barbarian hook here, it's a state of mind. Tech barbarians are from sci-fi, primarily 40K, Warhammer 40K, but also from Isaac Asimov. And it's basically the sci-fi trope of where people have been blasted back from their advanced technology, and there's more mysticism and ritual associated with it than actual understanding. So I want you to be like a tech barbarian. I don't want you to be afraid of technology. I don't want you to be afraid to mess with it. Make a mess, please. Swing your keyboard like a club. People tell me a lot of times that they're scared of breaking something. And here's the truth. If you're going to be doing anything with tech, you are going to break something, but you're also going to learn how to put it back together. And that's going to teach you a lot. And if you accept it, you can wade right in. I also want to stress, and that might be clear from this, but what I'm going to be showing today isn't necessarily best practice. I want to show you enough to be dangerous. I want to give you the tools where you can go in, you can recognize some HTML code, you can maybe change some things and then break it, fix it, and learn from that. I want to give you the confidence to be able to like at least know what you're looking at. Oh, and another example of our tech barbarianism, the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, called that for a reason. A couple notes for during this presentation. The chat should be open to everyone. I'll double check that setting. Yep, everyone should be able to chat. Please, if you have a question as we're coming along, you have a comment, throw it in the chat. If it makes sense to stop where we're at, I'll do that. Or we'll just kind of go through at the end. There's a limited amount of time, hence why I'm not necessarily teaching you the best practices, but I want to be able to get to all of your questions as well. I'm going to have example code. We're not going to be all in PowerPoint. Thank God, right? I will be sharing the links to this example code. If you have a second monitor, feel free to pull it up and I'll drop it in the chat. Otherwise, I'll be showing it on the screen so you can just follow along with that. And like I said, we'll have time for questions at the end, either verbal ones where you can open up mics, or you can just type them in if that's easier. Okay, so what are we actually learning? Let's finally get to that. We're going to learn 3 elements that all can generically be put as like web page code. HTML, which is the building blocks of the website, the CSS, and that's the blueprint that tells us exactly where things go. So if we build something with HTML, CSS places it in its proper spot. And then JavaScript. We're only going to briefly touch, not even touch, we're going to look only really at JavaScript. But this is the active part of a web page. This is really what makes apps on your phone, or this makes, if you've ever had to use a web application, probably for work, I'm sure many of you have. So yeah. And then we're going to take a look at how to peek at any code of any website. And that's fun because you can actually edit the code of any website and make it say whatever you want, only locally, but it's still cool. And I'll also at the end give some examples of how to use this HTML for actual AU work. Chances are if you're tuning in, you might be a web editor, and some of the things I want to show you can hopefully make life a little easier. So let's talk briefly about HTML and CSS because they're separate, but they don't really stand alone. HTML, like I said, builds the web page, but it doesn't give instructions on where to place it. It just does one after the other is kind of the default instruction for it. And CSS doesn't make anything, but it tells the HTML where to put all the different elements. So again, if we use our house, if we're making like cabinets and shelves and doors, that's HTML. But we don't want that all in a pile. We want to assemble it to make a house. And CSS is that blueprint and that assembly of it. And so you don't really have one without the other. Relationship goals, right? Okay, so HTML, the building material. These little carrots is what we call them, the little kind of sideways V's, hold a little bit of text that describe elements. Each element does something specific. The foundations, and I'll give you the full example of that, is basically what every HTML page needs. You really only mention these things once. You have to declare in your code, this is HTML. Here's a head. Actually, we'll just go ahead. You can see here with this in our first code, I've got HTML. Back. I got HTML, I've got my head here, and you'll notice I also have that slash head. This is very common in HTML. Almost every element is going to have an opening tag and a closing tag. There's a couple exceptions, but for the most part, if you do an open tag, you need to close it. And if you don't, it'll cause problems. The kind of common coding issue, forgetting a caret or forgetting a comma, stuff like that. So make sure you close all that. So you just have HTML within, and then you have a header. Within that, you have the title. And I have these two things here. This goes to, you'll notice a .css. That's our style sheet. And this is a script for JavaScript. Again, we're not going to really go into that. But the head is where you load items. If you have a script that does a video game on your website, or if you have a style sheet, that's in the header. And then the body is the main part of a web page. Like I said, you'll see examples of that. So with HTML, you've got the basics. A P tag is for a paragraph. IMG is for an image, as you might imagine. Headers actually have 1 through 8, so we can choose what kind of style header we want. And then BR stands for line break. That actually is a standalone tag. There won't be a /BR. It'll only be BR, and that's if you want text right up against each other. We have 2 generics, div and a span. You'll see in the code example that I'm about to pull up, but these don't do anything on their own, but they help us organize information. Divs kind of group everything in a box. So you might put a paragraph, a header, a paragraph, and an image in a div, so that way you can kind of contain it and then adjust the size and style of that div. A span tends to be for like a section of text. So if you want to highlight part of your paragraph, you would kind of put that section between a span, and you'll see. And then we have lists. OL for ordered list, UL for unordered list, and LIs for each item. Lists are everywhere. You've seen bulleted lists certainly on websites, but you've probably seen those little hamburger menus on every web page that drops down and gives you options. That's a list. And speaking of those hamburger menus, how do we make links? That's the A tag. And the A tag's interesting because it uses what we call a parameter, and a parameter actually gives a tag some action. HTML, for the most part, is static. It doesn't do anything on its own. The big counterexample to that is the interactive link or A tag. All right, so enough yam. Oh, and then comments, you can put kind of hidden messages. This tends to be if you need to come back to your code and scratch your head and wonder, why the heck did I do that? Well, you can leave yourself a comment for future you, and that helps. No back. All right, so let's pull up this example, and I'm gonna drop this first example into the chat. So this is a tool called CodePen, and what it does is on the right-hand side, it lets us do HTML. It actually does the foundational stuff. All of this right here is done for us, and all this HTML and CodePen is just in the body. So right here, we have a web page on the left-hand side. This is the output. And over here on the right is our example or our code, right? So you can see I've got these paragraph tags. Hello, welcome to this example page. And this BR does that line break. And I've closed the tag right there with that paragraph. I've got an image right here, and I just linked straight to my AU staff profile photo. And an image also doesn't have a closing tag. So images and line breaks only have an opening tag. And an image has to have a source, SRC. We call that a parameter. If there's something else inside the HTML tag, it's called a parameter, and it helps give it extra action, right? In this case, displaying an image. You see header 1, header 2, header 3. They serve more of a functional purpose for accessibility, which is very important, but we won't get into the details of that here. But it helps you break up information. Think of it almost like a table of contents using headers. Okay, so we got our first div right here. And this, you'll notice I don't see anything unique about it. It just looks like more paragraph. And we've got a list, right? And here, divs are basically boxes. They hold elements. We don't have any rules here because we don't have any CSS. So in the next example, you'll see that the div actually does something. But for now, it doesn't do anything. So we have a paragraph, and then we have this OL. And lists are interesting because not only do you have to contain your list within the open OL and the close OL, but then you have to do list items. So each item gets its own opening and closing tag. And you can see here, first item, second item, third item. And then finally, we have our other paragraph right here. We have an unordered list. And so UL, closing tag there. And you'll notice I put a span around this section that says this part is in the span. Again, we don't have any rules, no CSS, so nothing interesting happens there. And then another paragraph, and then links. Okay, so we have the most useful element, links. And this part right here is linked. We have our A tag, and it also has that parameter called href. Why href? I don't know. And that's honestly going to be just part of being a tech barbarian. Things work because that's the way they are. Now, whenever you do a link, you have to do the A space href equals open quote, and then put your link with, and it's got to be contained within quotes. If I didn't have that quote, it would cause a problem. And you'll see it just doesn't, because the website doesn't know what I mean by this, it just ignores it and pretends like it doesn't exist. And a lot of code editors have this nice color coding so you can see, oh wait, that's a little off. So we're not going to go there quite yet, but that's a link. And then here's a button. Buttons are also interactive. Unfortunately, they require JavaScript in order to make them interactive and do things. And in our next example, I'll show you that. But for now, it's a button and it does nothing. So that's a lot. But this is why I gave it to you in this CodePen link, so that you can edit it, you can take a look, and you've got to dissect these things, especially with websites. A lot of it's learning, looking at other web pages and learning. All right, so let's take a look at CSS. It's the blueprints. There's a couple things that CSS does. It does styling, position, And it has this thing called selectors that let us ID things, give it an ID or give it a class. You gotta have a little class here. We can also group things together, and I'll show you examples of that. And then finally, there's something called media queries. About 50% of our traffic to all the AU web pages is mobile. And a phone is very different in size than your computer monitor. And so we have to create specific rules for phones. And there's an easy way to do that with CSS. So let's just hop right into the example. So this is the same page. I didn't really change the content. I changed a few words, but it looks very different. Now, I wouldn't say this is necessarily the best designed page, but it's a new page nonetheless. So here's the example. All right, a couple things to note. First of all, we actually have code in our CSS and our JavaScript. You'll also know that, or you'll also want to note that some of these have IDs and some of these have a class. You'll also notice that I repeat the class here. And that's a quick rule about IDs in class. It's how we can use or give elements specific rules, and we can reuse them. Typically, ID should be unique. Use it once. Class tends to be more, well, it's for the classes. It's for everybody. And you can see here for this button, I've got an ID because I have one button and I wanted to do something. But let's go from the top. I put my header up top because that's just how you should do web pages. If you have a header one, it needs to be up top. It needs to be the first header you see. I put the image and the text into a div, and I gave it this ID intro because this is going to work separate from these other blocks. And I did that because I can give it specific rules. Whenever I resize, I hit a certain breakpoint, and you'll notice that the image and the text swap. This is the media query that I was talking about before. And that's why it's important. Okay, I gave it this unique ID. I can then use the ID to give it rules. Similar to our previous example, I just have a paragraph with a line break, and I close the paragraph, and then I close that div. So it's all contained in that intro div. Now here I have repeated divs that each have a class of block. I give them the header, I give them their ordered list, and it's the same there. And then the span, you'll also notice here, this section of the list entry, this part is in the span. So we've actually given it rules to do things, and I'll show you how we accomplish that. And then the only other thing to note, the button has an ID of something. Okay, still a lot, but let's break this down. So I'm importing a font for all of our text. And this is just the way that it works. If you're using what's called Google Fonts, you can link directly to Google's hosting of it. Otherwise, you have to download it and upload it, and it's complicated. You shouldn't have to ever import fonts. Right here with CSS, I can define rules for certain elements. So I'm giving rules for everything in HTML, which is the whole page, is going to have padding of 1 VH and 2 VW. What? And the font family is this font I imported. So everything's going to have a certain font. And padding. Padding's a weird thing. What does that mean? So padding gives a little bit of space. Let's actually just delete. Actually, I'm going to up this. I'm going to give this 10, and this is going to be 20. And you'll notice, hey, it all moved. Padding basically lets you give a bit of space between the edge of what would be the box for your elements. So in this case, since it's the whole web page from the edge of the screen. And so I've got this in order where it will do the top and then the sides, right? So if I change the VH here, which stands for view height, so I'm using 10 units of view height, and that shifts it down. If I want to add a little bit of space from the edge, the VW stands for view width. So this is the sizing stuff. This is positioning. There's a lot of different units for this, but there's really, well, 4, I guess, main ones. We're going to use pixels, percentages, and view units, view height or view width. The view height and width is useful because it'll automatically scale to your screen. If this was on a phone, it would use the view height units. Basically, it takes a standard measurement of the screen height, and that's how it can use it. Or you can do pixels, which is basically all the little dots that make up your screen, and we can measure that way. So I could do right here like 10 px and 20 px, and it doesn't move much, but pixels, px is how you do pixels. All right, so we have this ID called intro right here. And in CSS, you represent that with a hashtag or a pound sign, intro. And I have a couple of rules here. Display is flex, and the width is 65%. I could change this percentage to 100, and you'll see it goes all the way across. I could change it to 10, and you see everything gets squished. I recommend that if you're going to be doing this kind of stuff, you play with the numbers, because the numbers really do let you see the difference. Like, play around with that. Don't be constrained. All right, so let's do that. Get back to 65. So many changes. So the intro, we have rules for this ID right there. I have now intro, and then a space image. I have specific rules for the image alone. I gave it some padding, but it's a little close to this text, right? I want to give it a little bit of extra space. So I'm going to use something called margin, and let's give that 15 pixels. That's, we need our social distancing. And you'll see margin and padding are very similar. Margin is the space on the outside of the box that holds the element. Padding is the space on the inside, basically. So margin and padding largely accomplish similar goals, but they're a little separate. You can see similar effect with that. Now, if you just have one number for padding and margin, it's only going to do it across all four sides. We can specify the top and the sides by like this. Let's do 15 pixels and 30 pixels. So it's doing 15 pixels top and bottom, 30 pixels left and right. Or we can even go all the way around the horn and have a different value for all four sides. And so you can see it goes top to the right, clockwise. But we'll just keep this at the 3. We'll do 10 pixels. Give a little bit of space. All right, so we have a class. And a class in CSS is represented with a dot. So dot, whatever the name is. Block is what we did. So I gave all of these a border of 3 pixels, solid and green. I can do dashed. I don't know if there's dots, but let's keep it with solid. I don't like green. Let's go blue. Blue's a lot more calming. There we go. I'm calm. I feel nice and cool, calm, collected. The border radius also gives it that curve. So if we just did 3 pixels, it would be a very slight little curve to that border. You'll also notice that we have a rule. Oh, sorry. Let me go through the rest. Padding. Remember, first number's top and bottom, second number left and right. Width is 70%. And then the margin, I added this. Let's see if we do 0. Because the top, see how like this is running up right against each other? Whenever I add one view height, we now have a little gap. Remember, margin is sort of outside the container. And borders are great. CSS is great for giving borders because then you can see exactly where your element kind of begins and ends. All right, so if we did like padding, and let's say we did 50 pixels, you'll see all the text in here will move. Whereas in the margin, if we did 50 pixels, you'll see on the left hand, it's bumping over. So again, just clarifying more on the margin or the padding and margins, because it can be a little odd. Okay. So what's up with this? I just have UL and span. Remember, whenever we put the element name in CSS, it's going to affect the whole page. But I'm affecting every unordered list and every span in an unordered list. And in right here, this is our span. And I told it to be red. And sure enough, it's red. So that's how we can use spans. That tends to be something more dynamic, where you can highlight certain parts of a web page. All right. Now, for the most exciting part, the button. So similar tools, we set the height for it, 5 view heights. We set the background color. This is called hexadecimal. So if you do just like a color picker, you can find that color, and that's a good way to do that. And down here's my media query. We'll go over that in a second. Now, here's my button, and it now does things. If I click it, you'll see it hides that intro part. And this is JavaScript. So in this JavaScript, we use something called variables. We do variables that temporarily hold items so that we can change those variables. Think whenever you had to solve for X in like middle and high school, good old algebra. So I made a variable something, and I went through the document and I got something by the ID something. And then I got my intro and I get it by the ID intro, because I've set the ID for this div up top to be intro and this button to be something. And then I give something, this variable, the rule on click, do this function. First of all, it gives us a console message and it checks, is it displaying none? If it's not, then we're going to display. Again, this is basically magic. JavaScript is a whole different course for at least a whole nother hour. But like I said, that's how it does more interesting things than just sending you elsewhere in a link. So that's a lot. I know that's like throwing a whole lot at you, but that's how CSS has rules to change all of this. And you can see here in this media query, I can set a parameter here, max width 800 pixels. And then I'm giving new rules to the intro. So I'm saying, hey, I want the image to be smaller, because otherwise, if I didn't do this rule for the image, whenever I hit that size, too big, right? So I have a rule to make the image go up top, but that's way too big. That's too much me. There we go. And I'm changing the width of all these things that way. It's pretty much all the way across rather than only part. And so media queries, like I said, are very important because so much traffic is mobile these days that you kind of got to have it. Yep, and Chelsea, and that's basically the gist of it. CSS is the design, HTML is how you make it, and JavaScript is more interaction. So these examples, I would encourage you to play around with it. Play with the values in the CSS. You know, change pixels to view height or view width, VHVW. Try to add lists, paragraphs, and links. I will say that linking in CodePen's goofy because it'll try to pull it up here, and so then you get a whole Inception vibe going on. But such is life. All right. So JavaScript, I gave you the rundown of my example code, but like I said, JavaScript is how you move information. It's how you pull up records. It records videos. That's anything hefty that actually does things. That's JavaScript. If you're working on an AU page, you probably shouldn't be using JavaScript, or if you should be using JavaScript on an AU page, you don't need this workshop. All right, so fun part. We're gonna enter the matrix here. So any website, you can take a look at the code by hitting F12, not F and then 1 and 2, but the function button towards the top of your keyboard, 12. Now, let's take a look at our good friend, Tom Hanks. He's on Twitter. Did you know? I didn't know that. And, you know, I didn't know that, but I was pleased to see that he is a big fan of my course on how to love your inner tech barbarian. And not only that, I think he's hiding here right now because look, from June 8th, 2021, he's got a great tweet about how this presentation is wild. And he wishes us all a happy Staff Appreciation Day. Okay, so yes, please screenshot, share, and this is how we can kick off terrible geopolitical conflict. So F12, this is what happens when you hit F12. It might have console or sources or something else pulled up here, but you're going to kind of get this sidebar. And this is, especially in Chrome, a useful tool to be able to explore a web page. So right here, this is the web page. You can see, hey, we recognize this, doc type HTML, HTML up there. There's a header, here's a body, closing tags. You know this, you're tech barbarians. You can go through this and discover for your own needs and trolling. So as I hover over some of these things, you might see it's highlighting it. You can select specific parts of the page through this. It can kind of be a little tedious expanding all of these divs. Websites, as you will soon discover, are just a bunch of divs. It's boxes with boxes with boxes. But the easier way to explore is this kind of arrow in a box right here in this corner. You can click that, and then as you hover over things, you'll notice it's moving to that code, right? So I changed this tweet of his by clicking on this text here. Okay, I see this is a span. It has a class of a lot of stuff. You can have multiple classes. Oh, Matt, F key on a Mac. I think it might be the Apple button and I'm not sure. That's a good question. I believe though, if you just go to, there should be like a developer tool that you can pull up, I believe. Yep, developer tools, right? Oh, no. Let's see. More tools, developer tools. Yep, developer tools. So if you just do that with the options on Chrome, you can pull that up. All right, so I click on that tweet. I see this as a span. I see the classes. I don't know what those mean. I don't care. I'm a tech barbarian, right? So all I want to do is expand it. Okay, here's the text. And you can double click there and say, Yar text barbarian. Hit enter. And hey, we have now changed a tweet. This is why politics should stay off Twitter, because this is terrifying. So this is only locally on my machine. If you went to Tom Hanks's Twitter account right now, you would not see this. As great an endorsement as this would be. So that's why don't trust images on the internet. But this is a great way to actually explore and kind of see, okay, how was this made? How was this done? For bigger websites like Facebook or Twitter, there is probably not as much to learn because it's so complex and so in depth that it wouldn't necessarily be worthwhile. But you can learn a lot from it. Let's do american.edu/OCL, right? Even this is probably going to be more complicated than is super useful, but you can still take a look. Okay, let me take a look at this image. Okay, I see it's in it's a link itself right there. It's in a div that houses it. Okay, there's another div, right? And you're starting to get my point about how it's all just boxes, right? And so we can see there's about a dozen at least divs before we move on to something else above it, right? And so you can start to see how a web page is made. Okay, there's this one big div that holds both of these. And then within this one, okay, we've got our text over here, and that's contained in a bunch of boxes. So I would encourage you, and this can be fun, not just for the trolliness of changing the text on the page, but you can take a look and see exactly, oh, how was this done? And what can I learn from it as well? All right, so let's take a quick look at some of these other things. So we have elements here, like I said, you click this arrow in a box, you can take a look and you can explore. Another very useful button here is this, it might be a little clearer here. It's supposed to be like an iPad and a phone or a tablet and a phone. If you click that, it will give you the mobile view of a web page. And especially when you're designing, this can be really useful. So you can make sure, okay, this is how it's fitting. I might need to adjust this, etc. And you can see, oh, okay, wow, all these rules. That's the media query in the CSS gets pulled up and it says, okay, I can detect I'm this size. And then you can rotate it and see how that works. You can change the device. That's an iPhone X. Let's do an iPad. And so you can see, oh, okay, we have specific rules for that. And this is why sometimes folks will be asking me, how can I perfectly align stuff, especially on an AU web page? And I'll say, don't worry about it, because what you see is not what everyone else is going to see because of all the mobile devices, but also even just computer screen sizes are so different. My desktop is different than my laptop, which is different from John's laptop and Bill's. And so don't try to get things pixel perfect. You have to kind of operate. You have to let go, be a tech barbarian and just let it be. Console and sources here are neat. They are neato burrito, but they don't necessarily do much. I think Twitter has a bunch of errors. So console is whenever it's trying to load stuff and you can see a whole lot's going on because Twitter is complex. These are just warnings and error messages of what loaded and what didn't. Sources is pretty cool. So with this, I can actually take a look at all the images on this web page. Oop, and it's resizing. So you can see all the images that are loaded on this web page because the sources will show that. And so I can also see, hey, news. Oh, wow, these are contained there. You can also look at code and stuff. You can look at the style sheet. Oh, that's empty. And you can also see that there's a whole bunch of other things that get loaded into this jQuery. We got Crazy Egg. We got Google Analytics. We got Facebook stuff going on here. You'll see the actual AU elements make up a fairly small part of what makes up this AU web page. And then the rest of the stuff is even more magic than I'd care to dabble in. Elements, though, the main one, elements and sources are going to be the most interesting part of taking a look at a web page if you hit F12. All right, so let's take a look at some actual AU examples, and then I will open it up for questions. All right, so this is probably, especially in our era of updated information and just trying to provide as much, this FAQ, by its nature, kind of just has to be a wall of text, and that's fine. Information is important to have out there. One thing that we can do, though, is make it easier to hop down to that information, and this is using what's called bookmarks. So if you'll recall, on our webpage, we made a link here with an href equals, and we did a whole nother website, right? You don't have to do a whole nother website if you're linking to something. In our, yes, reload please. In our example here, editor view, that, we gave this div an ID, and we can actually link directly to IDs. And I will show you how on this page. So I should be logged into the CMS, and I'm going to just work on this page. We're not going to make any of this live in case Health Center's here. But if I go to edit this page, I'll see a couple things in our editor. This has a little flag here. Interesting. All right, so this is our first link, and I know because we just tested it that it goes here. So how does that work? If we hit the source button, well, we should recognize it. You are all astute tech barbarians. So we have this href equals hashtag vaxrecd1. So let me take a look there. ID, remember, because IDs have that hashtag. So what we did here is we didn't even need to make this a link. We could have just done that in there. So I could have made the header 3 the ID, but you can give anything an ID. So we gave this text here an ID, and we matched it here by giving the link that ID. So the href equals quotes. Anything within those quotes goes to our Anchor screen reader accessible. I believe so. I believe so. I'm sure I will be told otherwise shortly. They've not flagged on any of my tools. Let me put it that way. And yeah, so the ID, so this link should send it to this right here. One way that we could potentially make this better is to actually add a link at the bottom here that says back to top, right? So I could do back to top, and I need to define a top, right? So let me go back to source, and I'm just going to make this UL ID equals top. And I'm going to go to this paragraph right here, and I need to make it a link now. So I'm going to do href equals top. And I need to close my A tag. If you're doing a link, the A tag, and it's in a paragraph and it's the whole paragraph, do it within the paragraph. It shouldn't be outside. I think it will still technically work, but it can cause confusion. Hey, we have a back to top button. So let's save, see if it works. Be embarrassing if it doesn't, but hey, look at that. All right, so I'm not going to save this, but that's anchor links, right? You give something an ID, an element an ID, and then you just do a href equals whatever the ID is. Make sure you don't double name the IDs though, because that can get into issues. I think you'll just confuse the system and it'll pick one. So that's bookmarks. And like I said, we found them very useful. And I know with all the information we have to share, that tends to be something that folks will probably have to do. The other thing I want to do, and this is, we will just click that. Let me drop this in the chat as well. This is not, it shouldn't be behind the CMS. Yeah, it is public, so anybody can see it. So this is called the user interface kit. And web team, I'm so sorry if you didn't want this to be publicly shared. I don't see any reason why not. This doesn't tell you how to code any of these specific elements. But if you hit F12, remember, we have the power, and you click this little arrow with the box, you can click, I want a button, right? Okay, great. I see it's just a link, default link button, but it has class. And so the class is btn space btn-default. If you do a space in a class, you can add multiple classes to a button. So we see that it's got a button btn class and then a default button class. And if I do this primary button, it's a button, but button dash primary. So let's see this in action actually. Yeah, I actually prepared. So on the AU webpage, if we go to edit it, we've got a regular text and this is a link, right? So I've already made this a link. I can see it goes to this PDF. If I hit source, I will see that this is a link with the class button dash default. So let's make a whole brand new one. Actually, all right, so we've already made Green American right here. We've got this as a link. I go to source and I scroll down. I see it doesn't go anywhere, but that's fine. I'm just going to do class equals open quote btn dash primary and close the quote. Remember, if we open tags, we got to close tags. If we open quotes, we got to close quotes. And I'll hit save. And whenever it refreshes, we should see, work on this page, all changes. Work with me, CMS, work with me. There we go. Great. It's a button. And there we go. So this user interface kit has a lot of different elements you can use. Another very popular one, especially at the start of COVID, was these boxes. And these are just divs. Divs, it has a role alert, which helps with screen readers to say, hey, this is an alert. It should pop up first. You should hear it first. And then the class actually gives it these rules. You'll see that this actually has 3 classes. It's an alert, it's an alert-info, and it's just a single alert. Pandemic's rough. And you'll see this is just alert and alert-info because it's got multiple. And you'll see they put within this div, they put a unordered list. And you're saying, wait, Cole, I see an image, this little eye, but there's no image element in here. Well, that's because it's actually through those CSS rules that AU's web team has done that it creates that image without you having to do anything. So this is where CSS, especially if you're using it over and over again for elements, can really save you a lot of time and is super useful. So here in my example page, I've got this div that is an alert box. Wow, I'm an alert box. And you'll see we have this div class alert. And I can do another one, div class equals alert dash info single role equals alert. And I close the div tag. Then within this div, I'll do a paragraph, test info alert. Hit source. Hey, look at that. And we should have another box there. Perfect. All right, so that's the UI kit. There's a whole lot here, but those are kind of the buttons and the alerts are the most common ones that I have to use at AU. So, and I suspect you will too, now that you have the knowledge. One final thing, I tried to make it happen here. It didn't really work. Sometimes you'll copy and paste some text and it will say, it'll have a big angry red message and say inline font detected. So I actually copied this from one of my slides in Google Drive because I found Google Docs tends to do this the most. If I hit source, you'll see I got all this extra junk in there basically, right? So I've got a paragraph that has this dir equals letter. I don't want that. and this ID docs internal. Okay, it's probably Google Docs. It's got the specific ID. Basically, each document generates a unique ID. I don't know what this is, and I'm a tech barbarian. I don't care. I just want to get rid of it. So be aware that sometimes when you copy and paste, and especially if you get that alert on the AU system that inline font detected, I believe is the default message, this is how you clean it up. Go into the source and look inside your element tags, and you'll see a lot of stuff. If it doesn't make sense, you're probably safe to delete it. Just make sure you don't accidentally delete like one of these carets, right? So if I deleted this, um, it doesn't necessarily break things, but it's a little goofy. You can see, there you go. It wanted to close the tag for me, so it created a new paragraph. So just be careful when deleting things, but don't be scared. Um, you can usually clean stuff up and fix it. Or reach out to me. I may regret it, but reach out to me, and I'm happy to teach and make sure that you know exactly what to do. Um, so yeah, so you can see it kind of looks goofy, but that's because I copy pasted from my page. That is it. I threw a lot at you. That's why I made these code pens. So you have these links. Please mess with them. You can change these to your heart's content. Um, and let me know if you have any questions. I'll open up for that. Chelsea, did I teach myself all this? Yes and no. So I did take some basic web design courses in high school, and that kind of gave me the nuts and bolts of HTML and CSS. A lot has changed since high school, um, and so yeah, kind of by and large, I told people I know how to make a website, and then they gave me what they wanted, and I realized I didn't know how to make websites. So a lot of Google searching and YouTube tutorials go a long way. Yeah. Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, folks. My pleasure. And like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Um, it's we're we all get to lean on each other and help each other out with this. So it's really good to make sure that everybody is informed and knows. So with Wix and Squarespace, they actually give you what are called I guess GUIs, graphic user interfaces, to create that. And so people will code specific like templates, right? The templates are just CSS, right? It's some HTML and CSS that you can then say, okay, I want to replace this image with something else, right? So it's like if you took my example page and you said, well, I don't want this to be green, I want it to be blue. And they give you an interface outside the code to mess with it. And like, okay, upload an image for this. So Wix and Squarespace are great for that because you as a coder could potentially create a template that people buy, but you as a user don't have to code. You can just select from a drop down or from a color picker exactly what you want. So yeah, indeed, Andrew, I agree. Yeah, well, good. I'm glad this was fun. Yeah, I like I said, I'm a bit irreverent, so I like to try to keep things a little lighthearted. Coding can be very frustrating. My poor cats will hear me cursing under my breath sometimes, but it's rewarding. It's you feel like the lowest worm and like the most powerful god while coding. So it's a roller coaster of emotions, is for sure. Well, thank you all for joining. I know, like I said, tech can be very daunting and terrifying. I hope at least what I've shown you today is not only useful, but gives you a little bit of confidence. Like I said, the Barbary is a mindset in the region of Africa. Don't be scared of it. Wade into the tech. If you break it, the worst thing you can do is put it back together again, or call me and we'll find a way.
Thank you so much, Cole. We are so, so, so grateful to have you a part of StaffCon this year. Folks, we have one more StaffCon event later this afternoon. We are next at 12 o'clock hosting a virtual coffee chat with AU affinity groups. I think all of them are going to be there. So it should be a really like healthy, like full conversation and chat with our AU community members. So yeah, our program is posted in the chat. We look forward to seeing everybody later on today and tomorrow for more StaffCon, and happy Staff Appreciation Week, everyone. All right, take care. Thank you,
Bye.
Paul.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Cole.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Chelsea, Ellen. Thank you, Ellen, Chani.